I'm back with my man David Pakman, and I saw this interesting report. It was a survey called Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, and basically they found that liberals, more than conservatives, base their opinions on emotion. This actually doesn't strike me as hugely surprising, but I thought it was kind of interesting. Researchers conducted 6 studies to examine emotions, ideology, and how they act together to affect support for policies. The first 2 studies focused on intergroup empathy, while the third study examined the interactive influence of ideology and despair on support for policies. Participants self-identified as being at different points of the right-left ideological spectrum. So after they did this, it came out that liberals are based more on empathy and emotion than conservatives are. Pac-Man, you big lefty liberal, do you agree?
Well, it's no surprise that the policies, I mean, just look at what the policies are, right? If you look at the strict father morality of the right and how you deserve to actually be forced to carry a pregnancy to term if you were stupid enough to get yourself pregnant, aside from whether you lacked the access to sex ed or birth control or whatever, that's a very unempathetic position. So there's no surprise whatsoever that empathy is playing more of a role in
Right, but they
influencing.
were that said though, they would argue that they're being empathetic to the fetus, right? Like that they believe that that's life, so they're being actually empathetic in that regard.
That's the argument they would make, but apply it to any other situation. I mean, even if you look at gay marriage, right? The idea is we should be by law discriminating against people because they are, if you have a religious right-wing perspective, living in a situation that is sinful, which is that's an unempathetic God, right? If they're acting on the behalf of God, it's a very unempathetic God who says it should be punishment, both legal and in the afterlife, for living this lifestyle that they claim is sinful. So whichever issue you want to look at it as, there's no question. I mean, who could possibly be surprised that empathy and progressive politics are connected?
Yeah, do you think there's some kind of risk though in your political beliefs being so intertwined with empathy? I don't know that I have an example off the top of my head, but that, especially in a time when we live in this 24-hour news cycle where we get information so quickly, you just see a video and everyone's in the outrage machine. So everything is so based on emotion, right? Every time we see anything, everyone immediately, someone says something that you never heard of before, and then they say something you don't like and you start screaming about it. That there maybe is some risk in attaching empathy so much to what you believe.
I think there's a confusion, and the study sort of tried to distinguish between these two things, and I don't know how well of a job it did. Making decisions or taking political stances on what policy should be based on empathy is very different than saying you're making decisions that are emotional as opposed to empirically based. And we shouldn't confuse those two things, because we can look at the same set of data, right, and say, well, one side based on empathy thinks this should be the policy, and another side based on an equally accurate analysis of the data without any empathy thinks the path forward should be B. That's different than just saying, I don't care what the data are. Here's the decision I'm making based on emotion. Empathy and emotion are two things that are connected but not the same.
Right. What's that famous saying? It's like if you're in your 20s and you're not a liberal, you have no heart.
Yeah.
And if you're in your 30s and you're not a conservative, you have no brain. So it sort of feels like it has a little bit of that twang to it, that maybe younger people are a little more emotionally driven. And then that naturally is going to have you believe in liberal principles. Then I don't know what happens to people in their 30s when they start getting more conservative.
That's actually, it doesn't happen. That's one of the biggest myths. So let's see if I can explain this in a way that's clear, because even I have trouble explaining this. If you take a survey at any given time and break the results down based on age, you will see that the older groups are more conservative than the younger groups. There is no evidence, though, that that same younger group will in itself be more conservative by the time they're older. What it is that subsequent younger groups end up being more liberal. So it's actually a myth that the same people become more conservative as they age. It's that the oldest age group surveyed at any given time is the most conservative of those who are then alive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a little hard to wrap my brain around that, but I do get you. You know, it's interesting when I came out to my grandma. She was in her early 80s at the time. She was always very, very liberal. She was always, you know, into progressive stuff and eating right, and she was always sort of ahead of her time. But I remember when I told her, it meant nothing to her. She could not have cared less. She said, "Are you happy?" And that was all that mattered to her. And yet there's this idea that somehow older people, like to her, it was like, I think she had her 80 some odd years on the planet. And what she had ascertained at that point in life was you just got to be happy. That's
right.
what she learned, as opposed to, you know, somebody that might be 80 that would be holding on to some sort of religious belief or something else that would supersede happiness, which I think the whole point of living is to find some piece of happiness.
Of course. And if you just think of yourself, are you more conservative now than you were 10 years ago?
Am I more? No, I'm not. I mean, well, you know, we've talked a little bit about my evolution where I don't think I'm as purely progressive anymore as you are, but I am certainly I'm as staunchly liberal as I've always been.
Right.
Sure.
So the comparison would be, are you more liberal or conservative at your current age than your parents were when they were your age? And I think that's the way to sort of illustrate it.
That's interesting. So the answer in that case would definitely be yes, because obviously I'm for gay marriage. I would guess my parents, when they were my age, weren't. Although you could argue it just wasn't really part of the national discussion, and
sure.
maybe had it been, maybe they would have. But right, so I get that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it.
All right, cool. Well, what do you guys think? Do you get more conservative with age, or is that just a complete misnomer? And are liberals more driven by empathy and emotion than conservatives? There's a lot here. Of course, we have a link to the study in the description right down below, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what you think.